Today's reading may sound kind of familiar. Just 2 chapters earlier, and exactly 1 month ago, Mark tells us that Jesus fed 5,000 people. And we're about to hear Jesus is at it again, but this time he feeds 4,000 people. So why does Mark give us both stories? Well, maybe because compassion isn't just for a select few. It's for everyone. You see, the first feeding, the 5,000, Jesus shows God's abundance to the hungry crowd in Israel. In the second feeding, the 4,000, Jesus has moved into Gentile territory. And he's demonstrating to his audience, and then by extension of time us, that compassion isn't limited to boundaries or borders. I invite you now to listen to today's lesson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Carla. The reading this morning is from the book of Mark, chapter 8, verses 1 to 9b. In those days, when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd, because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come a great distance. His disciples replied, How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? Jesus asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute. And they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now, there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. The end.
By the time August settles in, many of us know what people mean when they say the dog days of summer. The afternoons can feel long and heavy, right? Well, today's not too bad, but previous to today, the afternoons can feel long and heavy and very hot. My garden gets awful thirsty this time of year, and my grass gets awful brown. But it's also a month that can spark urgency. I've heard so many people say, summer's almost over, it went by so fast. And in response, some people try to squeeze in that last trip before school starts. Or they try to finish that last outdoor project before Labor Day begins to usher in autumn. Now, in a season like this, whether doggy or urgent, whether we're complacent or just plain busy, compassion can sometimes get pushed to the side or begin to feel optional. But our faith tradition tells us something different. Our faith tells us that compassion never takes a vacation. Compassion doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. Compassion doesn't stop at the edge of familiar territory, and that compassion crosses borders. In the 8th chapter of Mark's account, Jesus isn't standing safely at the center of his familiar religious life. He's been moving through places where the lines between us and them were set in stone, deeply guarded, deeply felt. Now, just prior to this passage, Mark tells us that Jesus was in the regions of Tyre and Sidon. These are places associated with Gentile communities. And as you probably already know, Jews and Gentiles, well, they didn't get along so well, to put it mildly. And this matters. It matters because the feeding of the 4,000 isn't just a repeat of the feeding of the 5,000. Instead, Mark is showing us here where Jesus' compassion went next. First, the first feeding, as I said before, back in Mark 6, took place in Israel. And in that story, as you might remember, there were 12 baskets of leftovers. Numbers are important when you read the Bible. 12 baskets of leftovers. And that 12 is meant to remind us of the 12 tribes of Israel. But here in Mark 8, Jesus is in Gentile territory. And it says there were 7 baskets of leftovers. The numbers, again, are not random. 7 is the number of fullness, completeness. And a word I made up, enoughness. Enoughness. It's as if Mark is saying there's enough love for all of God's people. Even enough for those beyond the borders that we've drawn. And here's the really cool part. Jesus looked at this crowd, this mixed, borderland, hated Gentile crowd, and said, I have compassion for these people. He didn't say these are not my people. He didn't say they should have planned better. He didn't say their hunger is not my responsibility. He said, I have compassion. I have compassion. Now, this text about compassion reminded me of a story that I heard many years ago. Now, it's a story about a town with a river running through the middle of it. It could be any town in America. Because you see on one side of the river, way up on top of the hill overlooking the valley, lived the families who had been there for generations. But on the other side, down near the water, lived the newer families, immigrants, refugees, day laborers, peoples whose language and customs were unfamiliar to many living in the town. Now, there was no wall between these divergent communities, only a bridge. But that bridge felt longer than it looked. But one winter, a flood came. The river rose fast, and the houses on the lower side lost everything stored on the ground. Blankets, mattresses, children's shoes, the food they had bought for the next week. And at first, the people on the hill watched from a distance. Oh, they felt sorry for them. They shook their heads and said, isn't this awful? But then there was one woman who couldn't stop thinking about the children. One woman who lived by herself. She was widowed, but she was kind of kept to herself. She was kind of introverted, but she kept thinking to herself, those children. And she decided in her head that she needed to do something about it. So she made a pot of soup, packed it in her car, drove across that bridge, and went up and knocked on a random door. Now, think about that for a second. This is a woman who's introverted, who's really not very social, but she felt so compelled to do something to help these people that she made soup and went up to a stranger's door and knocked. Now, she didn't speak the family's language, and they didn't speak hers. But hunger has a language of its own. Shivering has its own language. But relief and compassion also speak a language. Now, the next day, she went back with blankets. And the day after that, someone from her church went with her. And by the end of the week, the bridge that has always divided that town became the road by which compassion traveled. People brought diapers. They shared food. They offered translation help and appointed rides. And then something really awesome happened. People began to call one another by their names. Not by the old labels, but by their names. They stopped saying, those people over there across the river, and began saying, Maria needs a ride. Jose's little girl needs boots. The Ramirez family needs help replacing a mattress. Because that's what compassion does. It crosses bridges. It learns names. It turns strangers into neighbors. It doesn't erase difference, but it refuses to let difference erase God's love. It becomes bread in tired hands. It becomes fish shared among strangers. Compassion there is enough for everyone. God's love is enough for everyone. Compassion is enough for everyone to be satisfied. Can I get an amen? Amen. When Jesus fed those Gentile people, strangers from across that metaphorical bridge, he showed what it meant for us to join our faith with action. He demonstrated a love that's tangible, a welcome that becomes a meal, a grace in which there's room for all. And that's good news for us as we enter August, when our energy begins to run low and our patience thin. We can look to Jesus and see his compassion doesn't wilt in the August heat. It doesn't close up shop for a vacation. It doesn't say come back in September when things are more organized. Jesus met people in the wilderness, in the heat, in the inconvenient places, and asked his disciples to help distribute what grace had provided. And my friend, God continues to call each of us, to call the church into this same kind of sacred work, to notice, to listen, to share, and to help co-create a more just world for all people. Perhaps that's our invitation this month. Maybe we could check in on a neighbor during a hot spell, or bring food for the food pantry. Maybe we could offer patience to a tired parent, or pray for a person who feels far from home, or notice a quiet sadness beneath someone's words. But it also looks like being the church beyond our walls, caring for the poor, embracing diversity, protecting the vulnerable, and practicing an extravagant welcome. So, as the dog days of August continue to stretch before us, let's remember that compassion never takes a vacation, and that in the United Church of Christ, we trust that God's vision isn't finished yet. God's vision is ongoing. We envision a table wide enough for all people, and we seek to encounter God's Spirit each and every day, a Spirit that's still nudging us towards a just world for all people. May it be so for you and for me. Amen. And God's beloved said, Amen. Amen.